Thank you, Mr Speaker. I take a call on behalf of New Zealand First with the Resource Management Reform Bill. New Zealand First does have a policy of supporting streamlining legislation in this country to improve our productivity and to support economic development and to grow the economy and jobs. However, in this particular instance, Mr Speaker, we have some grave concerns with what is happening here with the Resource Management Act. I will quote the impact statement, which says here, the Resource Management Act is New Zealand's principal statute for managing natural and physical resources. The Ministry of the Environment also states that New Zealand's main piece of legislation that sets out how we should manage our environment is the Resource Management Act. So this is a most important piece of legislation, Mr Speaker, that was brought into this House and passed in 1991. Over 20 years it's been on the statute books, and it is highly regarded around the world as one of the best pieces of legislation anywhere in terms of environmental safeguards. Many other countries around the world have studied it and have adopted the measures that are in our Resource Management Act, and it is often referred to in international legislation, in international case studies, in terms of good legislation that other countries would also like to abide by. In terms of when we were looking at the 200-mile exclusive economic zone last year, it played an important part in that we were extending out to the 200-mile limit, but the safeguards that were in the RMA, we also wanted to ensure many of those same safeguards were in our 200-mile limit exclusive economic zone bill that went through. But in this regard, Mr Speaker, we do wonder what the real motives of the national government are in relation to this bill, because once again they do seem to be having a cheap attack on local government with many of the measures in this bill. And through the select committee process and considering the submissions that have come in, it has been apparent that the government did not fully understand the ramifications of many aspects of the bill. An example of this would be that, for instance, in the tree legislation, this has changed considerably from what was introduced firstly with this bill. In the initial legislation, they were going to allow the fact that virtually all trees could be chopped down, and they could only be saved if they were individually gazetted and individually highlighted on property titles throughout New Zealand. That was a nonsense, Mr Speaker. That was a total nonsense, because if you can imagine that we are a tree and bush-clad covered country, if you had a situation where every property owner had to literally name and note the trees on their property to save them, otherwise they could be bowled over by any future developer or any future person wishing to develop the property, it could have had a huge impact on many of our bush areas of our urban environment and indeed our rural environment as well. And this was shown up in many of the submissions on trees, such as Leroy's Bush on the North Shore, where we managed to convince the government that it was crazy not to allow aerial mapping of bush areas and bush zones, and to allow an area that is naturally bush, some of it public reserve bush, some of it on private land, to be taken in as a bush zone where the properties could be listed, but you didn't actually have to name every single tree on individual properties. That was just a small example under the trees part of the legislation where the government got it wrong. And through this, Mr Speaker, there are many other areas where similarly the government doesn't appear to have a great understanding of what happens with issuing resource consents. And where they say this will be limited to 6-month time limit for projects up to a medium size, they don't always understand what is required in terms of issuing those resource consents for a proposal. And what we will see very much, and this will be particularly in the case of Auckland, we will see holus bolus development going on in Auckland, and sure, the government wants to see that. They want to see a vast acceleration of development, but it won't necessarily be in the best interests of the people who are dwelling there, the residents of individual urban areas, It won't necessarily be in the interests of the city itself. It will be basically very much in the interests of many of the developers who will be able to fast track and basically put things on the table in front of council employees and be told, get this through quickly, you've only got a few months and you've got no opportunity basically to hold it up and get it through. And this will be abused, and there will be many people who will wish to abuse the process as a result. And those who feel that they're not going to get a fair shake from their local authority will see, therefore, that it's better perhaps to divert it directly to the higher authority in Wellington. And many of them will choose to take that option. Many of them will choose simply to say, we're not going to work with the local authority, we're not going to work with the local regional authority, let's just get this sent directly to higher powers in Wellington. Let's work with the bureaucrats in Wellington and see if we can get through in a faster pace through the bureaucratic process in Wellington, who will perhaps turn a blind eye to half of the concerns. I can remember being in Taupo a year or two ago and hearing so many complaints about the apartments that were built directly overlooking the Waikato River by the bridge leading into Taupo, where that was diverted to central authority for approval because all the locals opposed those apartments being built. Everyone didn't want it on the entrance to the Waikato River, but it got approved through some other means, through central government, through central authorities, and Taupo people now to this day regret the fact that those apartments got built. We will see more and more of that happening around New Zealand, Mr. Speaker. We will see more and more of the bending of the rules, going for the direct line, going for the quickest option, and as a result, the environment will suffer. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the overview of the current Resource Act, it says under the Resource Management Act, resource consents are required whenever a person proposes to undertake an activity or development that does not comply with the rules of regional, district or unitary plans, with national environmental standards or with the RMA itself. And Mr. Speaker, what we have grown up with in the last 20 years is a situation where district plans and regional plans have been developed after extensive consultation with their local people. And in some cases, and I can recall the North Shore District Plan started in 2001 and was finally operative in about 2009, and it was staged over a period of years, and it came in over a period of years in different stages as different parts of the plan became approved. But it was with full consultation through the community, and the community had full buy-in to it. And so at the end of that period, Mr. Speaker, the community could say, this has absolutely been thrashed out, and everyone who develops within this community, everyone who does anything within this community, these are the rules of this community. We are buying into this club. We are joining this club. This is the club of XYZ community. This is the rules that we abide by. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, under many of the proposals under the RMA reform bill, the government is basically again moving in on local government and saying we know better than the local authorities. We know better than the local communities who may have consulted on their district plans for 1, 2, 3 or 4 years to get their district plans into line with what their community expectations are. It will be unfortunate because once again we will see central government, the big hand of central government, playing a big role in the future. They will move in if they're not happy with what local authorities are doing, if they're not happy with what local decision makers, the decisions that are made locally, then the government will once again step in and say, we know better. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we're seeing this too often under this government around this country. We're seeing it in Canterbury in particular. We've seen it in Auckland in particular. We're seeing it in more and more communities around New Zealand, and unfortunately we only have two tiers of government in this country. We have central government and we have local government. Unfortunately, this government seems to think that there is only one government, and that's central government, and that local government really doesn't count. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's a great shame, and I think we will look back on this and say, how did something that was brought in 1991, which was unanimously brought in this House in 1991, how was it trampled on in 2013 and allowed to be watered down when we actually did have a very good piece of legislation?
Jackie Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. See, here's the problem that the opposition